This is the Health and Politics podcast. Prevention is the new cure.
And that's with former ministers James Bethell and myself, Steve Brine. Good morning, James Bethell.
Hey, good morning, Steve.
How are you doing? I have to say, A-levels in the Brine HQ this week, James.
Listen, I think A-levels are fun, really, because people are doing lessons and subjects that they care about. We're doing GCSEs, which are brutal, because half of them you don't like and you don't want to do. How's it going in A-level land?
Well, my son's doing his GCSE mocks because he's only in year 10, but my daughter, I'm not sure, would agree with the word fun. So she's done textiles, which she's made the most amazing things. She's very clever. And she's doing business, but she's also doing politics. So yes, so last few weeks she's been cramming heavily for her politics A-level exam. And yesterday I was at home and I found myself in a rather odd position of testing her on classic liberal versus modern liberal and conservatism and socialism and the different strands thereof. And actually, looking at her notes, she knows far more than I do about it. Because, she was saying, do people in politics, front of politics, do they talk about this sort of stuff? The classic tradition versus the neoliberal tradition? I was like, no, not really. Only if you're in the tea room with Steve Baker, maybe somebody does mention it. But mostly, this is all just theory that was a century ago, right? But they have to write it down now as part of the exam.
Oh, Steve, that's completely the wrong parental advice. You're not meant to
it was an honest question.
Politics. You're meant to say that, no, there's a great battle of ideas out there, and the French Revolution is just being fought all over again. You've got to try and give historical relevance and context.
Yeah. But no, it is weird being asked all
room.
It's being weird asked about all this stuff. The other news is that, I've talked before about how I manage this boys' football team. Well, we haven't had a good season, let's put it that way. Football is a touchy subject with me, as we know, at the moment. But we went to the first summer tournament last weekend, which is sort of 6-a-side, 12-minute games. It's brutal. It's like back-to-back, bosh, bosh, bosh. Anyway, the boys got to the final and they lost in sudden death penalty kick shootout. And so, you can't, we're disappointed, but you can't feel too disappointed when you lose in sudden death pens. So I'm a big shout out to my under-15 boys for getting that close to winning their first trophy. It was great fun. I was kicking every ball alongside them on the touchline.
Fantastic. Well, I'm not a big football person, but I went to Manchester United versus Chelsea on Saturday and watched Chelsea women's beat quite solidly Manchester United women's.
Oh, yeah.
And it was absolutely fantastic. And football is a little bit like tennis at the moment. Like men's tennis is all right, but women's tennis is actually a better game to watch. And the nice thing about watching women's football is they do actually try to score goals. Whereas quite a lot of teams, Arsenal and Tottenham in particular, sit back, do nothing, try not to make a mistake. And if they have a draw, brilliant. Whereas the women were really at each other. It was a ding-dong proper football match. And I loved it. And my daughter used to play. And she's quite a frightening individual. And she played for a boys' team. She was the only girl. And I said to the coach at the end of the season, so how did it go? And he said, well, the technique's not really there, but the boys are quite frightened of her, which is quite useful as an attribute in a footballer. Anyway,
I love
she plays
that.
lacrosse now, and that is, the fear factor is definitely big in lacrosse.
Oh, my goodness, brutal game. Yeah. When I was the MP in Winchester, there was lots of boys' football teams, of course. But during my time, the Winchester Flyers, which is the girls' team, because you're right, you would often get the boys' team and there'd be the one girl in the team. But now, girls' football is actually more popular than boys' football in a city like Winchester. There are so many girls' teams, all different ages, and they're absolutely loving it. And, of course, the Lionesses have a big role to play in that, don't they? So what was the score of your match, anyway?
Well, it was only 1-0, but there were, I think, 20, 30 shots on goal. I mean, it was a really proper football game. Anyway, we need more of that. No VAR.
No, VAR has ruined football, he says bitterly.
Yeah.
Listen, welcome along. This is Prevention is the New Cure, is it not? We are on episode 98, James, of our Health and Politics podcast.
Big 100.
Yeah, big 100's coming up. We will reveal very shortly what we're going to be doing for that. But this is just what we try to do on this podcast. It's two former ministers. We try to tell a story about health, about politics, what's going on at the moment, but also lift our gaze and look ahead to what's coming down the track. We'd be delighted as you're listening if you'd hit the subscribe button. That will mean you get our brand new episodes, which drop every single Thursday lunchtime. You can WhatsApp us, many do, 0333 404 6507, and you can email us, many do that too, hello@preventionistheNewCure.com. is thenewcure.com. So, James, busy show this week. It's just us again. We deliberately don't have a guest this week because they've got so much that we want to talk about. This week, we're going to spend the majority of the show at the very intersection of health and politics, which, of course, is what we are all about. We're going to take a deep dive into what we're calling the tale of two health secretaries, and we're going to consider the record of both Andy Burnham and, of course, Wes Streeting.
And then we're going to consider the Ebola outbreak, which the WHO chief said this week was deeply concerning, both on terms of speed and scale.
Yeah, I agree. And then we're going to finish by talking about the magnificent Chelsea Flower Show and why health is once again taking centre stage there. But let's go to the top of the
talk to you about my lady garden.
Your lady garden, yes. Yeah, moving on. We'll come to that. We're going to take it back to the top now. So it's a funny old time of British politics, James, isn't it, again? But I suppose sooner or later, whatever the Prime Minister Keir Starmer says right now, we are going to see a contest to replace him as Prime Minister. And there'll be other pretenders to the crown, but the two names already out there, I suppose, are Andy Burnham and Wes Streeting. Now, Andy was Health Secretary from June 2009 till they lost office in May 2010. So the final year of Labour's last time in office, basically. And as we know, Wes was still Health Secretary when we recorded the show last week for about another couple hours. Wes resigned from the role last week after, less than 2 years. Now, the reason we're going to look at them is because both have put their record of delivery in government, and particularly Manchester on the part of Andy, and particularly in health, actually, at the heart of their early stage pitches for the top job. So we thought it was more than fair to see how they shape up. Lots of national press stories at the moment saying, Andy's record in Manchester is not what he says it is, and there'll be lots more of that about the both of them. But we do health, we do politics. So we thought we'd have a bit of a deep dive discussion on their record, good and bad. That sound right, James?
It does. I mean, the letter from Wes on his resignation put his health record absolutely in the middle of the leadership battle. And Andy Burnham's video again talked about health and the way and walkability and what he's done in Manchester. I've never seen health be in a leadership battle in such a big way. Both of us lived through quite a lot of leadership battles in the Conservative Party. Health was never mentioned, and this is quite different. So yes, let's have a look at that.
You mentioned Andy's video, so just before we start that discussion, let's just listen to a clip from this video that Andy put out on social media this week, which you have to say is very well put together.
It left places like Makerfield behind, and Britain has been on that path for the last 40 years, and it was the sense of injustice I got about the way this country is run that took me towards politics. You okay?
Yeah, well, I'm a United supporter.
Oh, are you? Right, yeah.
You are more than welcome in Ashton.
Oh, really?
You should know that.
Thanks very much.
So there you go. So you can see Andy, King of the North, walking around in Manchester, chatting to people and getting a bit of a hero's reception. One stat for you, James. One former UK Prime Minister previously served as Health Secretary. It's not obviously the classic direct pipeline, the way that Chancellor and Foreign Secretaries are. That was Harold Wilson. He served briefly as Minister of Health in the late 40s,
I didn't
early
know that
50s.
Before you put it in the script. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, no, of course there
I
have been
thought
plenty.
that Margaret Thatcher had been briefly Health Minister. Or was that?
No, she was an Education Minister, wasn't she?
The milk thing, she was an education thing, yeah.
The Thatcher milk snatcher. I mean, I suppose, look, a number of other political figures have used health as a springboard to try and get the top job. So Ken Clarke, of course, Alan Milburn, Jeremy Hunt twice, Sajid Javid, but only Harold Wilson's actually done it. So let's consider where we are. I suppose it's quite a rich contrast, isn't it? Because I think Burnham and Wes, I've thought about this a lot in the last few days. I think they represent two pretty different traditions, James, in Labour heartland Labour health policy. I think the way to see Burnham is that he's instinctively quite NHS tribal. So I think he's quite emotionally attached to the institution. I think he's very sceptical of the market and tried to roll back on some of the Blairite reforms in health. Obviously didn't have long. Whereas Streeting has been more reformist. I think he's been willing to challenge the structures and argue that the service itself needs to change. Whether he's delivered on, of course, any of that is another matter. But that's sort of my opening thought. And then I'm going to deep dive into what I think are Burnham's successes, and we'll discuss them, and then we'll move on to Wes. What do you think about that as a top-line framing?
Steve, I actually completely disagree with you.
Excellent.
We didn't rehearse this, but I have the opposite framing.
Go on.
which is that Burnham, at least in what he's been doing in Manchester, is trying to look structurally at how health affects a community, at the determinants of health. He understands about food and walking and activity and environment and worklessness, and he's trying to combine not just improvements to a health system, but how you get those to work with schools and transport and buses and playgrounds. And his understanding of the determinants of health is quite sophisticated, and he's used his platform as mayor to try to bring a sort of whole of Manchester agenda together. And by the way, I have a lot of sympathy for that. I think he's got a point. Whereas Wes Streeting, much more Blairite, targets based. He's trying to optimize, a handful of, or not even a handful, 2 or 3 numbers to be able to deliver them in the next election, and has made changes, sure, but really in order to drive input numbers like waiting lists in the old fashioned Milburn way, which is kind of okay, but I find very limited and tactical and unchallenging. So yeah, I actually have completely the opposite view as you.
Well, yeah, okay. So, but I think there's common ground there, actually, because what I mean by attached to the institution is, of course, the institution of the NHS
Yes.
first, them being the one that burned through the waiting list. Now, I completely agree that he has a wider whole person view, and we'll come on to what Devo Mank actually looked like in practice. But I suppose I like Andy. I'm just going to put that out there, right? I like Andy. I said on X earlier in the week that when I looked at his video that we just played a clip from, is that we first sort of connected in Parliament over the subject of breast cancer. I lost my mother to breast cancer when she was the age I am now, and Andy lost his sister in her 30s to breast cancer, which he's spoken about publicly, and I know his mother's had treatment for it, and his wife had a double mastectomy, which he talked about when we were in Parliament together, and I was chairing the all-party breast cancer group at the time, so we sort of connected on that subject, and I like him. And I don't want him to become Prime Minister for lots of different reasons. But I don't want him to become Prime Minister because I don't want to not like Andy. And the more I hear about some of the things he puts out there, I worry that. But let's sort of dive into the successes of him as a health secretary. And as ever, I should caveat by saying in politics, the pluses can also become your negatives, can't they? So I think he was early on prevention and whole person care. I think he was talking about integrated care. He was talking about joining up health and care well before it became mainstream NHS language. And I think his sort of whole person care agenda did become quite influential across Labour and local government. So I think he was talking about prevention probably a decade before the NHS genuinely understood that it needed it. Now, whether he was successful in that and whether Devo Mank did that is another matter. The National Care Service, I also scrawled that down in my notes. I think Burnham proposed back in 2009, if you remember, a National Care Service, effectively introducing something like the NHS for social care. Now, if you remember, that was on the eve of the very contested 2010 general election, and it became the death tax, didn't it? And the other parties said they wouldn't discuss it with him as health secretary. But intellectually, I think many would see that as an early recognition of the care crisis that Britain now faces. And in fact, if you look at Starmer's manifesto in 2024, it talked about creating a national care service, literally in those words. So there's that. The other couple points I just want to make on Burnham is that I think he did move the NHS away from that sort of Blair era market and the NHS as the, quotes, preferred provider, rather than encouraging this greater private sector competition. And I think that won him a lot of support from NHS unions and NHS traditionalists, which might stand him in good stead for the fight that he's got to come. So there's that. And then just the fourth and final point. So I remember this when I went to DH with Jeremy Hunt, who of course was very, very hot on patient safety. Andy Burnham commissioned the first mid-staffs inquiry. And I think that's quite important. And he did that in 2009 when he became Health Secretary, the Robert Francis inquiry. So that was into the failures at Stafford Hospital, if you remember. And I think that matters because I think later on critics tried to portray him, including in our own party, as sort of ignoring the scandal entirely. And I don't think that's entirely accurate. So there's sort of 4 points there, if you like, on the positive side of the Burnham ledger. What do you think?
Well, I love your bromance with the Mayor of Manchester. Yeah, listen, I find him a very attractive character as well. I've been up to Manchester several times and toured what he's tried to do. It's really impressive, I've got to say, in terms of using that mayoral role to bring together lots of different components, including welfare, which is tough, education, transport, all to pivot around health. That is the future. And I would judge the guy a bit on what he's trying to do and what he's delivering against that vision. And I think he comes off well on that. There is small evidence that health outcomes in Manchester are already beginning to improve and but get better than the decline in lots of the other part of the country. He's got a great team around him. The deal with Eli Lilly on GLP-1s I thought was very interesting as a model for how to use your city role in order to bring innovation to bear on chronic disease. If you're an innovative company, you head to Manchester right now because you know that there's going to be a good landing pad there for you. So that speaks well of what he's achieving there. And also in terms of doing a city deal with the Treasury, for me, that's the clincher. He's actually had the imagination and the muscle and the electoral license to negotiate with Whitehall to try to get some cash off the centre. It's an unbelievably difficult thing to do. And that's got to be the future. And then lastly, in terms of vision, I mean, he talks positively about health and the impact on the economy. Now, at the moment, politicians are in a real cul-de-sac. All they ever talk about is access. And there's not much they can do on quite a lot of that. So they just talk themselves into the corner and end up hating themselves over it. Whereas he's quite rightly talking about trying to increase productivity and create a thriving economy so Manchester families can afford a better life for themselves and for their children. That's the right framing for health. I wish we had heard more of that from other senior politicians over the last 10 years. And I hope very much he'll continue doing that. So for those three reasons, and those are sort of like future-looking reasons, I judge him pretty benignly. And we need more mayors doing that locally, because a lot of this delivery of health improvements in a sort of determinant point of view can only really be done on a local basis by mayors. So well done, Andy, is my view. Whether he can turn that into an electoral benefit for his leadership campaign is really important. It's not just interesting, it's important. Because previously you did it by attacking your predecessors over access and promising more doctors and nurses. Well, you know what? We've got a lot more doctors and nurses than we used to, and that hasn't changed anything. Productivity's gone down, 30% more headcount really hasn't improved access. So that is a dead end. So I'm hoping that his language will open a new avenue for the political discourse.
Yeah, no, interesting. He often talked in the past about the NHS couldn't survive as, quotes, a national sickness service, which if you think about it, that language,
that's the whole theme of this podcast, right?
Which we agree with, and that's why we did the podcast. But I mean, that language is now commonplace, of course, but 15 years ago, I don't think it was. So you mentioned social determinants of health, and I think he definitely views prevention as not just about public health campaigns.
I know,
he does look at the wider social determinants.
I judge people harshly on this one. Loads of people bang on about prevention, and it's very heartwarming. And you could put together all the white papers and all the speeches in the world, and it's fantastic. You've got to judge people on what they've done, and that's what I'm trying to do with Andy Burnham. I think he has delivered, high marks in terms of pivoting, using his role to the best of his ability to do it. And if you compared him with Sadiq Khan's taken a different approach. He hasn't rejected the prevention thing, but it's been a much lighter touch. He's done stuff on the tube. He's done stuff on school meals. But in no way has he tried to rewire London, which is difficult, by the way, because it's 32 boroughs and all of that. But he is the mayor that has gone further than any. He's almost like one of those Victorian, Edwardian interventionist mayors that's really gripped it and tried to drive it forward, which is what we need.
When we talk about integration and the whole person care agenda, when we were putting together integrated care systems at DH and Jeremy and then Matt and myself, we did look at what was happening in Manchester. And you think about Devo Mank, I wrote it down earlier, it's 2.8 million people across the 10 greater Manchester boroughs. So, a lot of people. And that integrated care system model that we put together for the rest of England, in some ways we did look at what was happening in Manchester. And I hear you on judging harshly, and me too. You know, I'm a strict teacher. You don't want me marking your essay today, Emily. But look at mental health as prevention, which I looked a little bit at this in Manchester when I was the minister, and I read about it since. I think that the Manchester Devo Mank deal and Burnham in particular have been quite good at recognising mental health as not just a treatment issue but a prevention issue. So, you know, he's often linked poor mental health with unemployment, with addiction, with family breakdown, the stuff that Ian Duncan-Smith was talking about at the Centre for Social Justice. And I think, you know, that was well before mental health having parity with physical health that obviously the coalition government then talked about. So I think he, as Mayor of Greater Manchester, I think he has doubled down on this with homelessness, rough sleeping, work, you know, again, treating health, housing, well-being, worklessness as inseparable. And so I think that's sort of maybe why I say he was early on prevention and whole person care. But as you say, taking it to a much wider audience on a national level is something that is incredibly difficult, which possibly takes us on to somebody who has just held the job at a national level, Mr. Streeting.
Yeah.
So I'm disappointed in Wes resigning, and you know, obviously he did it a couple hours after we recorded last week. We had so many health secretaries during the last government. And Jeremy obviously is the longest serving health secretary, which shows how much the churn was, given that he managed to achieve that in our 14 years in office, and yet we still had so many health secretaries. I really wanted Wes to see it out, see it through. I really wanted this Labour government that looked like it was going to bring certainty to give us a health secretary that did the whole parliament, so that he could own the diagnosis, which he did, then own the prescription, which he thought was the 10-year plan, and then he could see that through and own the successes and the failures of it. I feel a bit cheated. I feel a bit like he's walked away before that stuff can be judged, but he's not going to get away with it on prevention is new cure, because we are now going to judge his record and what that looks like in office. What are your top line thoughts, James, on Wes? Do you give him a C, a B plus, or better or worse?
Well, I do share some of your bromancy sentiments. He's such an attractive character. You know, when you meet him, he's so engaging. His craft as a politician is, you know, fantastic. He's a top, you know, performer, opening batsman. You know, him on a morning round is just awesome. And his own personal story. Listen, I had an unbelievably privileged background. I can only imagine what it was like to have been born in the circumstances he has. I read his autobiography. I mean, flipping hell, he came a long way. And you bring with that a sort of insight and expertise that's incredible. And he's a cancer survivor. Listen, he is the whole package in terms of the modern health secretary. And in talking to him on health generally, but also particularly on the prevention agenda about which we care, he totally got it. I mean, intellectually, he didn't need any persuading, and he's gutsy enough to understand that you make political progress by having battles in a good way, and he's shown he is prepared to have the occasional battle, and you do need that a bit. You can love the NHS but still want it to change. That's my feelings about it, and so that's the right framing. But yeah, Steve, you're completely deluded if you thought that he was ever going to do anything other than fight for the leadership of the Labour Party. I mean, the hope was really that he could he could somehow convert his ambition for the top job into wanting to do something really special in health and to chalk up real progress. That actually hasn't happened. So I am weirdly heartbroken by Wes, in as much as that I had so much expectation and ambition and sort of fuzzy feelings that he was going to do the things that as Tories we found our hands were tied about. And I really did think that with his big electoral mandate and his political craft and his ability to lean in and to confront difficult subjects, he was really going to move the needle. But really, I'm not sure about the impact. I mean, we will go through the list of what he's achieved for sure. But Britain is still getting less healthy every year, massively. It has not moved at all. And in terms of the prevention agenda, no resource shift, no significant moves, really, no harnessing of a whole of government approach. And actually, important institutional reforms, but done in a way to completely distract from any reform. So yeah, I mean, I am heartbroken, frankly, Steve. I am sad that things haven't turned out better.
Let me challenge your word deluded. I want to see a health secretary that does a whole parliament. Did I think that was going to be Wes Streeting? No. I'm disappointed that he didn't do that. But I said on the podcast a few weeks ago that I was hosting a dinner with Patrick Maguire from The Times. And he was asked this question about Wes Streeting. And I'm just going to repeat it now for listeners who didn't hear that. And the question was, we're beginning to wonder with Wes whether it's actually all about the next job, not about the job that he's got as health secretary.
It always was.
And I thought, bless you for asking that. Of course, he's a former president of the NUS. He's Labour through and through. I read quite a lot of the book as well. Of course, that was always going to be the thing. I'm disappointed that we haven't got a health secretary, whoever it is, who did the whole parliament, because I think they need to see it out. But that was never going to be Wes, and I guess that maybe Starmer knew that, that relationship's now broken down irreparably, I'm sure. And you noticed there was no warm words about him from the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Question Time yesterday. In terms of Wes's successes, there's sort of 4 things I wrote down here. I think he did change the political conversation about NHS reform. Ultimately, though, his biggest achievement may be rhetorical and political, but I think he made it acceptable for Labour to just say the NHS needs reform, not just more money, which is the point you made earlier. And that's a major shift after years of Labour just sort of defending existing NHS structures. Waiting list reductions. Look, there has been some significant solid progress on elective waiting lists and 18-week performance standards. And I think that does give him a tangible metric that Burnham never really had. Whether a lot of that is down to cleaning the data and the assiduous work ethic of Jim Mackey more than it is Wes Streeting, discuss. I think he embraced technology and productivity reform, building on the productivity challenge that Jeremy Hunt laid down with Chancellor. The 3 big shift strategy, the analog digital hospital community sickness prevention, they became pretty central to health policy, and I think they will sustain. I can't see the new Secretary of State, whether he's there for long or short, moving substantially away from them. I also wrote down here question mark. He was politically fearless with NHS vested interests.
Oh, no.
Yes, he did abolish or say he was going to abolish NHS England, but I'm not sure that's why I put the question mark, because ultimately he gave a big pay rise to the doctors, didn't he?
Yeah.
So was he really taking on those vested interests? That's why I say I think ultimately his biggest achievement is more rhetorical than it is political. But those 4 points, James. So political conversation, waiting lists, technology,
there's a lot there.
Interests.
Listen, Wes is going to be around for a long time. I like the guy. I want to work with him. But you do have to call it out. That giving the doctors that pay rise,
the huge mistake,
without any negotiation on performance or any renegotiation on role, was a massive mistake that really cast the die for the rest of the Parliament and helped blow up the health budget and also made a big sort of fiscal impact on the entire government. It was a huge error of judgment. Everyone, including me, warned them not to do it. And I was gobsmacked and couldn't sleep for 3 days when they did it. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible idea. And listen, there's lots of people make bad. I mean, I don't mean to be too judgy about it, but that can't be brushed off. I mean, that was he must hugely regret doing that. And now we have doctor strikes and a ballooning clinical budget, and we have no levers at all for an honest conversation with doctors about the evolving role and how we're going to rebalance their remuneration and talk to them about their pensions and all the things that need to be done. And by the way, to lead to a better outcome for doctors as well as for patients. But he slammed the door shut on that. And the consequentials of that, which I don't need to list out, have been enormous. So I think that was a big ding. If you can't. I mean, we're trying to be nice and we like the guy, but that was a bad one.
The other one that, in some ways you could say it's on the plus side of the ledger, which is my point, is about taking on NHS England. And there seems to be political consensus about that. I mean, the Tories have been like, we wish we'd done it. I still wonder whether they'll live to regret it. But, a reorganisation, which of course they promised not to do, the big structural upheaval, significant reorganisation at a time of challenged budgets. I know people will think, but hold on, the NHS has got a lot more money, but the NHS is making reductions, getting rid of people, and that's going to carry on into 26, 27. So that's going to consume and continue to consume a lot of time, a lot of morale, a lot of money. I wonder whether that will be hung around Wes's neck in the same way as the Lansley reforms are hung around Andrew Lansley's neck, because that is a main problem for him. The other one, so,
and just on that, I think the bit of it is the lack of implementation.
Yeah.
As a policy, it's got a lot to be said for it. I welcomed it when it was announced, but it was clearly, agreed on a Thursday night, announced on a Friday morning. That is no way to do institutional reform. So I think it's not the policy, it's more the implementation. And the 10-year plan being published without an implementation, it's all part of a theme. They just hadn't thought it through. I don't know why they hadn't thought it through. Was that a Keir thing? Was it a Sue Gray thing? Was it a Wes thing? It's still a bit of a mystery to me, Steve. I do not know why they didn't turn up with a plan.
So my understanding, James, is that I think Wes increasingly was frustrated with number 10, thinking that, when is the next strategy? When is the next strategy that we're going to launch? Because that'll be the thing that'll do it. So the 10-year plan, and then the men's health strategy, the women's health strategy, the rare diseases strategy, and of course the workforce strategy is the next big thing. And I think he was increasingly frustrated with that sort of health vacuum in number 10, because Prime Minister, having talked about the health mission in opposition, as you know, completely left the pitch when he became health secretary. Social care, I think, also hangs as a bad stain on Wes. It was completely unresolved. Like every health secretary, he struggled to make any meaningful progress on it. He kicked it into the longest grass with Baroness Louise Casey, who you used to sit with in the Lords. I'm not seeing any progress from that whatsoever. I've said before, I'll say again, I think it's purely to come up with something they can put in the next Labour manifesto and a number that Treasury can agree with. It's not a meaningful attempt at reform. And Wes completely ducked that because he was not going to get any more money out of Treasury, and he really just didn't want to take on that massive, massive challenge. But of course, he's not alone in that. As I say, every health secretary has ducked it for years, but I think that's a problem for him, isn't it?
It is. No, I completely agree.
Do you think he'll be Prime Minister?
That's a internal Labour Party matter. Listen. No, I don't think he will. I think the Labour Party is moving to the left emphatically. Andy Burnham seems to be much more in tune with where the parliamentary party and where the members of the party are. I don't really know about voters. Voters at this midterm, it's so splintered. They're just fed up with all politicians of all types. It's very difficult to really say accurately which one of the two of them would land better to deliver more votes in the right places in constituencies. But no, the Labour Party's off to the left, I'm afraid.
I'll give you some figures. YouGov did a poll of Labour members earlier this week. If there's a leadership contest, your first preference, Burnham 47%, Starmer 31%, Rayner 8%, Streeting 4%. Head-to-heads, listen to this. Burnham v Starmer, 59 to Burnham, 37 Starmer. Burnham v Streeting, this is striking, 80% Burnham, 10% Streeting. So I'll say it. I don't think Streeting thinks he'll be Prime Minister. I don't think he believes that he'll be Prime Minister. He's in the game to be Chancellor, or maybe one of the other great offices of state, but I think Chancellor's what he wants, and that's what this is all about. And whether Burnham becomes the Prime Minister that makes him one of those things, I'm not sure. If I had to put money on the by-election in Makerfield, I would say that it will be tight. But at the end of the day, the Burnham factor, the name recognition, will carry him over the line, and he'll come in and he'll challenge the Prime Minister, and he'll be successful. And that's probably why Streeting's saying what he's saying about the European Union, because I think something like 80% of Labour members are in London. And of course, they're very, very, very pro-Remain, wanted a second referendum. And I presume that's what he thinks he's playing to. But I don't think he's playing to be Prime Minister. I think he's playing to be Chancellor.
Well, just to step back and just think about the consequentials for the politics of health, maybe this is a good thing. Not that I'm talking down Wes, but Wes does represent a sort of a rerun of the Blairite playbook.
Yeah.
Paul Corrigan, Milburn, of trying to chase targets through process reform. by trying to optimize productivity. That's hard. And, I think they've tested that to destruction. Whereas for me, Burnham represents a 21st century approach to health that is broader and looks at the wider determinants and tries to think about how you increase the underlying health of the country. And also in terms of the reason for it is it's not just about access and meeting clinical need. It's also about productivity and meeting economic advantage. If that vision of health, the Burnham vision, wins through, then that is a great thing for our prevention agenda, I think, because it will have charted a political course, a different type of rhetoric, a different way of talking about health. So maybe there's going to be a benign outcome from this contest.
Who knows? Who knows? It's a great conversation. I really enjoyed this particular conversation. I think Burnham sees prevention as a social mission. I think Streeting sees it as a way for system survival strategy. Whether they then meet in the middle and come to somewhere that we like is your point. And who knows? Maybe that will be the case. Listen, that's been really great. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the deadly Ebola outbreak.
Welcome back to Prevention is the New Cure. The World Health Organization has warned cases of deadly Ebola may be spreading faster than originally thought. One man in the Democratic Republic of Congo's northeastern Luri province said infected people were dying very fast, adding, "Ebola has tortured us." The virus is believed to have killed 136 people in the Congo, with more than 514 cases now suspected in the country. One person has died in neighboring Uganda. This kind of stuff puts chills down my spine and triggers me from January 2020. Steve, what do you think? Is this something we should be worried about?
Yeah, it's just some facts here for you first. So it's a disease caused by a virus. So it's rare, but it's severe and it's often very deadly. The WHO has called it a public health emergency of international concern, which is the bit that really caught my ear when I heard it on the news this week. The largest ever outbreak of the disease was back in 2014, 2016 time. 28,500 people in West Africa were infected. The most frightening thing, James, is the WHO say there's no approved drugs or vaccines for this particular strain of it. And I see that the BBC are reporting this morning that the vaccine for this strain could take 9 months as the death toll now keeps rising. So I suppose, this is not another routine Ebola flare-up. I think what's alarmed the officials from the reading that I've done around this is that it's a combination of a rare strain, weak health infrastructure, which of course is often the case. You've got then cross-border spread, as you mentioned DRC, but you also mentioned Uganda, and the fact that the outbreak appears now to have circulated undetected for quite a few weeks before it's identified. And so I think if you put those together, you've got a bit of a perfect storm, which is why I say it's not another routine flare-up. So deeply, deeply concerning, and the heart goes out to the people there. But of course, there is a political dimension to this, isn't there? And the response that the world community is able to make, there were decisions that were made, some of them in Washington.
Absolutely, Steve. Let's be clear. Last time, America, France and Britain intervened in West Africa in a big way, and I think made a very big difference to study, contain and roll back the disease. That's not going to happen this time. Trump made that clear. We've had our own odor cuts. And we're handing over responsibility to nations that have made a huge amount of economic and social progress and, frankly, should look after their own public health. But it is bracing to watch. And I know, having spoken to officials who've been out there, it's worrying and scary. And then secondly, there's been no mention of vaccine development. I'm not quite clear whether the existing Ebola vaccines are relevant for this strain or not. But if it does start becoming ripe, so last time a vaccine didn't materialize in time to make a difference. It didn't work out. In terms of having 100-day sprints around these kinds of vaccines, I don't think the mechanisms are quite in place yet to make that happen. And if it does start entering, communal spread, which I hope it doesn't, then we are going to start leaning on vaccines as the way out. Well, it's worrying to think that isn't quite in place yet. So it's not a catastrophe for British voters, but it's on the horizon and puts tingles down my spine for sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing that concerns me is that it's now reaching more urban environments. So, historically, the outbreaks burn more easily in the isolated rural areas. But once you start seeing cases connected to bigger transport hubs and the cities, then real trouble presents. And I think there's some suggestion that's what's happening here. So in terms of, what happens next, I suppose the worst case scenario is that you see substantial urban spread, which is that point. The WHO is not calling it a pandemic threat yet, but I think officials are worried enough to escalate it globally. It's just whether anyone's listening to those calls for help, which is your point. So, heart goes out to the people there, and all power to those that are trying to make a difference.
Very good.
Okay, I know we want to talk about that. Let's try and end the show on a more upbeat note and talk about Chelsea Flower Show, which, not being flippant in going from one to the other, it's just the way we're going to end the show today. This week, of course, RHS Chelsea Flower Show. And it's striking, James, how many gardens are explicitly tied to health and well-being, even to prevention. I've been to Chelsea many times, including when I was a health minister, and I understand that you're off there later today. So we thought we would just sort of end the show today by considering some of the brilliant show gardens that are there this year, which speak to what we're all about on this podcast. You're off there today, and it looks like it's going to be sunny for you.
Well, it's mixed. So I've weirdly wore a cotton suit and also an overcoat. Classic British combination.
You'll look like Monty Don in a cotton suit.
I know. It's wrong either way. You're absolutely right. Hey, listen, there's a huge connection between nature and health. We should try to make that connection more. DEFRA and DHSE should have a unit between them, working out how we use the countryside and contact with, the natural world in order to promote health. I personally get a huge amount out of it. I go wild swimming, as you know, a lot of mornings. And just that feeling of being in the water with the reeds and the smells and the ducks and all of that, it really lifts my spirits and improves my underlying health. I'm going to be there as guest of Lady Garden, Jenny Halpin, which is a women's health campaign, particularly about sort of the cancers of the Lady Garden. Really important cause. And the thing that really strikes me is what a huge amount of energy and impetus there is now around the women's health bit of that health agenda. And we're seeing that at the Chelsea Flowers Show. My goodness, there's a new generation, I think, of clinicians and leaders and investors who aren't just trying to make the case that women's health is different to men's health, but are really trying to push through improvements in research, delivery and access on women. This one's going to run all for the rest of the decade. I'm hearing the jungle drums on this big time, and it's really exciting because they absolutely got a point.
Yeah, I'm glad you're going to see the Lady Garden Foundation. So they're a charity that look at the 5 biggest gynae cancers, and I saw them on the Chelsea coverage on the BBC. It's called Silent No More Garden. It was designed by Darren Hawkes. Absolutely beautiful. There's so many others. Just to put a few out if you're going or if you want to look them up online. So Parkinson's UK, you've got a garden called A Garden for Every Parkinson's Journey, which Arit Anderson, who's a brilliant TV gardener presenter, whose adopted sister, has Parks, and she's designed this amazing Parkinson's UK garden. So do go and look at that one, James. Alzheimer's Society are there. Microbes and Minds Garden, which I'm told is very good. And then I really love this one. Asthma and Lung UK have designed something called the Breathing Space Garden, which Angus Thompson's designed. That looks really, really interesting. And then CPRE have done this garden called On the Edge, which Sarah Ebola has designed. And she's the most decorated garden designer in Chelsea history. She also won Best in Show for this garden. And what it's about on the edge is pieces of green ecology on the edge of our big city and our big urban environments, and how important they are, that you can be in a city, but you can, within a short walk or cycle, you can be out there in the green environment. And this garden that she's done for the CPRE is one Best in Show, as I say, and I think it would be really great if you get to see that one when you're there today. Just the other thing I was going to say is when I went there as the minister to look at a lot of these health gardens, I met there's so many interesting charities that don't necessarily necessarily have show gardens, but are there and have a presence there. And I met this charity called Super Shoes. I don't know if you've ever come across them, but they're
who are they?
So that they're a UK charity, and what they do is they provide custom painted, personalised shoes to children and young people who are undergoing cancer treatment.
Lovely.
If you Google Super Shoes, you'll see them, and they were there, and I just was so moved by what they were doing. And there are loads of different health and wellbeing organisations, because we know gardening's linked to lower stress levels, improved mood, better sleep, lower blood pressure. The whole green social prescribing agenda is right up our street, isn't it? The other thing I love about Chelsea is that you drive past the Royal Hospital at Chelsea, don't you? And it's just this beautiful open space. And then suddenly they transform it into these amazing gardens and this sort of big environment. And they move all these great big trees and bushes and shrubs in there. And then, a couple of weeks after, it's all gone. And you think, oh, has it all just been thrown away? Not a bit of it. They're very hot, the RHS, on green and sustainability, obviously, and a lot of the gardens, in fact most of the gardens, certainly all the show gardens, they are lifted up piece by piece and then taken somewhere else as part of transforming that area. So I think that's really good. So the shop window, the Chelsea Flower Show, is obviously what it is and what we see on the television, but then they go and they live back in the communities where they come from, and I think it's just a really positive thing. And when you watch the Chelsea Flower Show television program every night, which I've been doing this week, you feel slightly better about yourself. You feel better about the world.
I sort of agree. I'm not into the gardens at all, I've got to admit.
Are you a gardener?
No, not at all. No, I have
really.
a garden, and I love walking around it. But Nick looks after it, and he does a great job, and he enthuses me with it. I absolutely leave him to do it. Steve, it's the most amazing networking exercise in Britain. And everyone is there. It is the most extraordinary thing. And there's a huge hierarchy between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I'm not very competitive with my wife, but
how does it go if you ever are?
Well, she clearly completely outperformed me. And on this occasion, she went on the Monday and I'm on the Thursday. Yeah. I am thrilled to be going to the Lady Garden, but I have to admit, in terms of social and business angst, she totally beaten me on this one by getting a Monday ticket over my Thursday ticket. So, listen, the garden thing is lovely, but everyone's there for the networking. I think we should be honest about that.
Oh, great. Well, see if you can find an interesting health garden guest for the podcast when you're there. There's your homework. I'm really envious that you're going today. I've thoroughly enjoyed going when I did, and I'd love to get back there, he says, without dropping any hints to anyone listening. Right. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Hope you've enjoyed it today. We hope we've had a bit of a ding-dong about the different subjects that we talked about, the Burnham streeting, and touched on Ebola, and then finished on Chelsea Flower Show. We really hope you enjoyed the show. You can find us on all the usual social media channels. Don't forget you can email us hello@preventionisthenewcure.com. This episode is produced, as always, by Callum MacDonald, the lovely Callum MacDonald, and it's part of the Shortbread Media family. I'll see you next week, James.
Thanks, Steve.